Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This is episode 169. Today's guest is a comedian, writer, actor, and musician. His screenwriting credits include Pixar's A Bug Life and Disney's Hercules. You can see his stand-up special, Don McEnery, Just Saying, on drybarcomedy.com. He's performed stand-up comedy all over the country on the biggest stages, including working with Howie Mandel for 4 years. And of course, he wrote the season 3 episode of Seinfeld, The Tape. Please welcome Don McEnery. Don, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
All right, Don, take us back. November of 91, season 3, for our money, probably our favorite season. The Tape, all-time favorite. Over 15 million people watched that episode that night. Tell us, David Steinberg obviously directed. Tell us a little bit about, how you got involved on the show Seinfeld, and then how that episode came about.
Well, I'll probably be your worst guest because that is my involvement on Seinfeld, that show, that episode. So I was writing with my writing partner, who was very good friends with Larry David, and he called up and said, "Hey, you want to write a Seinfeld?" So, yeah, I'll write a Seinfeld. Okay, pitch me some ideas. So we worked on it, pitched some ideas, and okay, go ahead, write it. That was the extent of the contract negotiations.
What were some of those ideas you bounced around? Maybe that made it to the show or didn't make it to the show. Where were you at as far
the ideas that the idea we pitched was the 3 stories and all of them were true. That they did call Larry and my writing partner called China to grow hair, and they. The delivery boy came, and Bob Shaw, my partner, ex-partner, but a partner at the time, he looked at he was making a joke to the delivery boy because the Jesus, I can't think of words. The bill was all in Chinese script, and he looked at it, he goes, "Hey, you left out a Y or some joke." The guy doesn't get it. But Bob goes, you speak, because they needed to call China to grow hair. And they goes, "You speak Chinese?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay." And they had him call. So they're all true stories.
Is the tape itself a true story too? Did someone leave?
That's a true story for me. Yeah. I never found out who it was, but it was in the back of the Improv in New York City. Woman left and I don't know who it ever was. I never found out who. So.
Wow, incredible. And then obviously you turned that into a lane. So you mentioned so take us back, 91, you mentioned your writing partner. Who was that?
Bob Shaw.
Oh, it was Bob Shaw. And then he obviously joined Seinfeld. So what were you guys obviously did stand up. And then he was close with Larry, it sounds like, and he gave you that opportunity.
Yeah, he was on Larry's floor when, he moved to New York. Yeah.
Wow. So, all right, so you write that. Larry gives it, I guess, an okay, and then I guess you go to CBS Radford and you're on the lot. Tell us a little bit about how that works when you're on the set.
I was on the set. I wasn't on the set for that shoot. I was still in New York when they did that.
Interesting. So I guess how many was there a back and forth with Larry on the script and like final revisions?
We sent it to them and they made their revisions and said good job. We had they made changes due to things that were going to happen throughout the series. So
and you said you weren't on set for that taping, but it sounds like you were on set for
I was on taping when I came to California to write on Arsenio for 2 weeks. It wasn't that I got fired in 2 weeks. It was just a 2-week. Somebody went on their honeymoon. And it was, it's like any set, you sit around and everybody thinks that a taping of a TV show takes a half an hour. People come to California and my relatives go, "Oh, you can get us in to see that." They think they're going for a half hour. They're going 3 to 4 hours to see shows. But, it's just like any other thing. There were rewrites on the spot, and it was, and I was in the background, but I had nothing to do with the episode I was seeing taped.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned the way that this episode came about. You're working with Bob Shaw, and he's buddies with Larry. So, at what point? Because this is still early on. I mean, the tape's episode 25. I mean, this is season 3. It just got picked up, right? So, had you known, had you seen it from the beginning, right? Since that connection with Larry and even maybe Jerry, I'm not sure. But at what point was basically the show on your radar as either a fan or from being in that world?
Yeah, totally a fan. It was a great show. Yeah, I had watched it. You know, I was up to date with it. Yeah, we knew all the characters. It wasn't that hard to write for it for us. You know, knowing the characters. So you know, but it was I always tell people it's episode 25. They don't remember the name of the show.
I mean, yeah, I mean it's an absolute classic. But you know, you say you knew the characters, but I still think there was a lot of character development happening at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, George Kramer didn't have a big kind of role in that episode, but he played that perfect kind of neighbor with the camera and everything.
Well, that's a true story too. The real Kramer recorded the hair growth. He wanted to record Larry's hair growth, and Larry was convinced he lost hair doing it. Like Bob Shaw came to him one day and said, "Oh, I saw this thing on PBS last night. It's China is cured. You can grow hair." And they called, and it was like 3 a.m, and nobody understood. You know, there was nobody who could speak English. And then he hooked up with the delivery boy, and then the guy goes, "Bring $300 to the Bank of China, and they'll come in 2 weeks." And it came in 2 weeks. Shaw says that it smelled so bad, that's why he stopped using it. It really smelled terrible. He said it smelled so bad that taxi drivers would turn around at him and sneer. He smelled so bad. So, you know, and the real Kramer videotaped it.
Yeah, I mean that's where these stories come from, right? Is usually true life. We've talked to a few writers, especially early on, that were in Jerry's stand-up world, like Pat Hazel and Bill Masters, Mark Jaffe. Were you as a stand-up, you were in New York, right? You're from, is it from Long Island? Is that where you're from originally, yeah. Right?
Yep.
And so did you have what was your connection to Jerry in that world? Did you have any?
I was one of the near the end of Catch a Rising Star. I was one of like the 3 or 4 house MCs at the time. Mike Sweeney, who's a big writer now. Jon Stewart, who you may have heard of. And so I knew him through there. I didn't hang out with Jerry at all. I knew Larry from the Improv in New York, and that's where he hung out. So I worked there a lot too. So those are the 2 clubs I worked in New York. So I was aware of them. You know, I was, I said hello, and I knew Jerry, but we never, went out and hung out or anything. And he had his group of friends. I was also, even though I'm the same age as Jerry, I was a few years behind him because I wanted to be a musician and a songwriter. I was, and. So I came to comedy late. I came to comedy almost at 25 years old, a week before my 25th birthday. So,
wow. So, and then what was kind of that light that went on? Like, when did you decide, hey, like, was it just like around family, telling jokes, or when did it click? Because that, to your point, that's a little late. You had to be funny, obviously, but getting on stage.
I was always funny, and I always noticed. I don't try to be funny. I mean, I obviously try to be funny to write something, but like I make people laugh. I go, "Oh, I didn't even know I was going to say that." That's I always knew I was funny. Well, here's what happened. I had the only panic attack I ever had in my life. I was in bed and I'm going, "Oh my God, I'm not going to be a songwriter. I'm not that good. I'm like, blah, blah, blah." And I was just, I was just having a worst anxiety attack. And all of a sudden in a second, I go, "You should be a comedian." And my anxiety attack went away. I said, "Yes, that's what you should be." And nobody I told that I was going to do that thought that was a bad idea. They all go, "Yeah." Like they go, "Yeah, we always thought you should be." Even my mother didn't take too unkindly to it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so they all saw it. They all saw something, and songwriting. If you have that knack, it's that I'm sure it's the same muscle, but it probably. I guess what makes me laugh is that you
What's
said
funny?
well, what made me laugh was when you said the anxiety went away when you thought of being a stand-up comic. Because I'm guessing it as um, a musician seems like it has to be more precise all the time, whereas stand-up you have time to kind of work on the act and kind of.
I don't know if it was that. I knew I was funnier than I am a musician.
Okay, fair enough.
And a good musician.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's good. Do you still is music still in your life though? I'm assuming, right?
I play the piano every day, and I go to a friend's house every Sunday where they're all watching sports, but he has a baby grand piano, like a full acoustic baby grand piano, and I go play 3 hours every Sunday, and I write songs there.
That's great. Yeah, that's something too. Is that you could always. That's a hobby. You can't do stand-up comedy as a hobby, right? Also, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, just kind of getting back to
do it as a living too. So go ahead.
Fair enough. Yeah, kind of getting back to that. The Seinfeld. I know you mentioned the time you were on set, and we know that with A Bug's Life, you worked with Julia. Can you tell us a bit about that? Your interactions with the cast. Was there any interactions on Seinfeld set, or obviously later on, like I said,
just meeting them? They were working. They're in the middle of shooting an episode and wanting to go home. So I got in and met them, and I was the Bob's partner, the writer. Oh, nice to meet you. Blah blah blah. But that was that was the whole thing there. As far as working with Julia on A Bug's Life, on Hercules, we were in all the recordings sessions. In A Bug's Life, we weren't in any of them. They just did it differently, I guess. They did. So.
Yeah, so tell us a little about that transition. So, at one moment you're writing sitcoms, and the next, and Hercules, by the way, I watched with my kids, fantastic film. But how do you make that pivot to kind of cartoon?
It was sheer luck, and I always say this. I owe my whole career to Larry David for calling us up and saying, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Because Seinfeld got us a meeting with Disney, and through that meeting with Disney, we got called for maybe the Hunchback, Mulan.
Okay,
and we came in and talked to them. I go, we like you guys, but you're not right for Mulan. But we got this thing coming up, Hercules. We'll call you for that. We just thought they were blowing smoke up our ass and going, yeah, sure. Yeah, all right, man. And then sure enough, they called us back 2 weeks later and gave us a script, a basic, first draft script. And we had to come in and tell them what we could do with this.
Now, when you say us, is that Shaw again? Or
Yeah. We always worked together until we didn't work at all together.
So
is that contentious, or can you talk about that?
It's not contentious on my end; it is on his end. But
interesting.
He won't talk to me. I'll talk to him if he'd like, but
won't talk to us either. We can't he's like a ghost. We can't get a hold of him. What
is it? The Hercules royalties, or what happened there? Well, we don't have to get into it, but I guess
partners drift.
Yeah, that happens. But I guess let's go back to the beginning, though. How did you and Shaw first connect? And obviously, there was a great connection there. I mean, look at the writing you guys did.
I met him at the Improv, at the old Improv in New York. There was 2 doors down. There was a stoop that goes down, and that's where we'd go and smoke pot, while we were hanging out.
Yeah.
And, that's when pot was illegal back then. It was still called pot. It was still called pot. That's how long ago this was. And I'm looking at him and I'm talking to him. We're talking for a little while. I go, I know you. I know who you are. I had seen him at Nassau Community College on a Thursday morning at they have the student union. They would have these shows, and he was a comedian there. He was one of the acts they used so he's a few years older than me. So, I was in college and he did the show, and I always remembered it. And then I'm sitting next to him and I'm telling him his whole act. And he goes, I don't even remember that stuff. I wasn't telling him his whole act, but he was, he was really funny. Was a great comedian. That's why we started writing. He was getting, work, and he'd be killing in clubs. And he said, every time I killed, they go, hey, Bob, we'd love to have you back, but we got to pay you less money. The boom was waning. So he wanted to get into writing. And we met in New York and then went to a couple of movies. And he said, let's try writing. So I go, yeah, sure.
That's a great story. Nassau Community College, I thought you were a Temple guy.
No.
That's fake news. They're showing on the internet. All right.
I don't know where that would be. If you look at my IMDb thing, that's not my picture. There's a picture.
Yeah. I figured that out.
And the only reason I don't care is that guy's a lot younger than me. So
that's what it's like. What's going on?
I could get the gig. I'll show up and they go, "You look different from your picture." Yeah, well, it's TikTok or what do you swipe left with? God,
what do those say? So back to the tape. So. What do you remember? We talked to a lot of writers and, they were credited and so on and so forth, the ideas. But when they watched the show, Larry, for the most part, changed everything and put his kind of lipstick.
Larry changed a lot. Yeah.
He did. So, tell us a little about there are so many great lines in this, like Ping, it looked like Stalin. Like, what do you remember? Did you write any of those specific lines that you recall?
I might have. It's so long ago that who remembers who. One of the rules in a room too is you don't once it's written, doesn't matter who came up with it. It's not you don't really mention that anyway. But there were major changes in the thing we had in our story. It ended. He found out who it was. Our episode ended. He's looking at a fold out in Playboy, and it's the woman who left the message is the centerfold, and he's reading her likes and I love funny guys.
Oh, nice.
So
it's interesting too because you said it sounds like anyway. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. That the sort of falling out with Bob Shaw happened later on, right? You wrote all these
much later, yeah.
So curious because Shaw's also credited with The Chaperone, and he's actually I think credited on staff with Seinfeld. I thought,
right after we did that, Larry got his 4 friends: Shaw, Bill Masters, Steve Skrovan, and John Heyman, and took them on as consultants or whatever it was.
Got it. Okay.
It wasn't staff writer, and so they got credit on some episodes. They were in some episodes too. Bob is a taxi driver. He's a cop.
Yeah.
You know what? He's also in. Bob Shaw is in. Malcolm McDowell is Sherlock. Is not Sherlock Holmes. He's the guy who wrote The Time Machine and Jack the Ripper. The movie where Byrne chases Jack the Ripper into the future because he stole his time machine.
I don't know the name of it, but I know you're talking about
Somewhere in Time. What the hell's the name of that? But anyway, Shaw's in that at the bank. He has a little scene in that.
So it's interesting there. So Larry brings on his 4 buddies there. I mean, you're in that circle, and you just said that like not who knows who roll what.
Bob's there, but how about Don? He's my partner. He goes, look, I got 4 guys, and I don't really know him that well. These guys were really old friends. So So,
but did you bounce ideas or submit anything during that time that even if like you said, because you never knew who got credit, were you at least?
No, I did not. No.
You did. Okay.
But it was good for both of us that he went. Plus,
sure.
When we had pitch meetings, I never would tell them that story. I just told you that I wasn't, there too. It's like they would think I was there as well.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the actual tape, which was the name of the episode, was your story that happened to you. You mentioned some woman, like in the show, Jerry called up the club, and I don't know how he got someone's number.
You find out who was working your station. You know where your tape was. You go, oh, who's working the back station?
So you did the same, I assume.
Yeah, and still found nothing. It didn't really lead anywhere. It was just, for all I know, could have been a prank as well.
Yeah, and the funny part about this episode that you wrote was obviously you weave the Elaine character into it because it's Julia for sure, but Jerry actually went out on a date with this woman, this other woman, which I'm pretty interesting because she clearly didn't leave the message, but she still went out with them. But
that sounds so foreign to me. Is that really what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, early 90s, what are you going to do?
Well, but he thought she was, but she just wasn't the girl.
Right. And that's why he was confused that nothing happened on the date, because he thought she'd be a bit more forthcoming.
Right. But that also was a big change from our script, that it was Elaine that left the message. So that entailed other changes to that too.
Yeah, I know you said you were in New York when the shooting of your episode aired, but it is important to note that legend David Steinberg directed the episode, which didn't happen very often. It was usually Tom Sharonis or Andy Ackerman. There's only a few episodes that weren't by them, and this one happened to be a David Steinberg directed. Not sure if that had any bearing on anything, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up in case it did. Like, I'm assuming the director's not involved as far as you wrote the script. It could have been any director, right? But it happened to be David Steinberg. So I'm curious if you had any connection with him throughout the years.
Well, I'm a huge fan. I loved him, and I got to finally meet him when we were at the Emmys. We got nominated for an Emmy for that episode. So, it was the first thing we ever really wrote. We got nominated for an Emmy, so that's what brought me out to California. But I finally got to meet him, which was a a big plus. I was a huge fan. I watched him, and it's funny how I wasn't really a big comedian nerd when I was growing up. I liked comedians, but I didn't know every. Like, I was talking to Wayne Fetterman last night. He goes, now I forget who it was. He said, you never read a certain book about comics. I go, I never read that. He goes, I can't talk to you.
Yeah, incredible. Well, listen, that may be because you got that late start. Late start. You're only 25. I mean,
Well, I only said that because I was like, so Riser and like I would open for Riser. Riser was already, moving up. So was Jerry. They were in a different realm. They would be coming through town, but they were out making the big bucks and working before I started working. Like, one of my first gigs out of town was opening with, in Ohio with Paul Reiser. So those guys were, started when they were 20. They were 4 or 5 years ahead of me.
Yeah, and they kind of had, Carson was the ultimate, right? I mean, it's funny. I was watching a Larry David interview, a few days ago, and he mentioned, obviously, Johnny didn't like him, but Johnny had his guys, but he kind of picked and chose. But another funny guy you worked with, interesting, is Bob Odenkirk. Tell us a little bit about Melvin Goes to Dinner. I mean, I know that was 20 years ago, but geez, what a cast.
I cannot tell you what that movie is about to this day. My wife's artwork is in it. They use my wife's artwork.
Oh, nice.
And my only real involvement in it was an end scene where we were standing around, and I think it was still photos. I didn't have an actual scene in the thing. I may have been in a scene where we're just sitting around, but there was a thing. I was a cop at the end in some still shots. But you put anything you can on your resume. So whether it turns into an interesting story or not is another question. But I've known Bob a long time. I know Bob. When did I just see him? A couple of days ago. We're neighbors. He just lives a mile from me.
Yeah, it's another Seinfeld alum too. Yeah, and so Long Island guy, right? We'd be remiss. It's kind of our neck of the woods. We're both from Rockland County, which is just over the bridge there. As Chris mentioned, you kind of gave us the rundown on how you started comedy, through musicianship. When did you? And you've mentioned it a couple of times, but when in this whole journey, was it the Seinfeld script got you to LA and then that was it? You never went back to New York, or did you kind of bounce back and forth and have your roots in New York, or you're just LA all the way?
No, I mean, I moved to LA. And then we did Hercules, and then I moved. I kept one of my apartments. I had 2 apartments, like in a building, like one small one. But and we moved up to San Francisco for 6 months to do A Bug's Life. So I still had an apartment here, but that was the best time. The best time I ever had was working on A Bug's Life. I'm on a per diem, getting paid. They're paying for my rent and my car. So, I moved from New York to here, and but then I've since traveled. I still was doing comedy at the time. I gave up. I was working for Howie Mandel then, and when I got Hercules is when I had. Well, now I got a job. I really can't go traipsing off here and there. So.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. So what does that entail, working with Howie Mandel? The writing, I mean...
No, I just opened for him in shows. I was his opening act.
Oh, all right.
You drive to Van Nuys Airport, pull up to a plane, they take your car and your luggage and move your car and park it, and you get on a private plane, you get the hell out of there.
That's how it works, Ohio. You got that?
Come back the same day. You come back the same day.
So you mentioned you were
10,000 people at a state fair, Arizona State Fair. I performed in front of 10,000 people.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, listen, from 10,000 to 15.5 million watching the tape, big jump. But so you mentioned you're a big Seinfeld fan. I don't know who do you most? Yeah, I know you're. The tape was specific about Jerry, but I always like to get a feel for our guests. Like, who do you most relate to? Like, of those characters.
Well, I would.
I know you're a comedian, but
so just for that, I'd be more Jerry. Except I don't relate to him at all. I'm not like that. I think Jerry is a great comedian, but I think he makes things up. Like, his last special, nobody likes going out to dinner. Who wants to go out to dinner? It's a $20 billion a year business. I think people like going out to dinner.
Especially him. I'm sure he goes out every night and has...
I know. Who doesn't like going out to dinner is my question, including him. Of course he likes going out to dinner. So to me, that's a made-up premise. It's like, it's just you're going to hang something on the fact that none of that's true. So, but as a comedian, I don't know. Nobody. I mean, not that I didn't relate to them, but they were certainly relatable to people, and they're like real people, only hyper realized,
Right. Yes. And later on, they got way more hyper realized, which we didn't really touch on. I mean, we're much bigger fans of the earlier years, particularly season 3, to be honest with you. 3, 4, 5 really is when the show is at its best. 6 is okay. 7's not bad. And then by 8 and 9, this whole crop of new writers comes in and kind of, just to your point, that relatability pretty much goes out the window and the show becomes a cartoon. No, I don't know if you could talk to that, how much you watch the show. I mean, we're obviously doing a podcast about it, so we analyze it. But I mean, if you've watched enough Seinfeld, you know that like that relatability goes out the window. The groundedness of George becomes just a yelling caricature, and all these cartoon type episodes start to happen. And
it's also a prelude to Larry's show, the Curb Your Enthusiasm. I love the show. I don't watch it all the time, like. When I'm working in Vegas or something, you have a TV where you can't just get whatever the hell you want on it. I'll watch episodes of Seinfeld or any sitcom, just because that's all that's on. But every time I watch it, it's fantastic, and it's just every bit as funny. And any season to me, it's like it's hard to write something good for 9 years, without with the rules in place of everybody has to have their own story and all those stories have to interconnect. And, it's not an easy job.
That's fair.
No. What hit home for you on Seinfeld specifically? I mean, you're a Long Island guy, so clearly, the New York kind of vibe, I guess
I lived in Manhattan,
Yeah, so you felt that. Was that
before I moved here? My wife and I moved from Long Island to Manhattan, so.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's what the critics said is very New York, but listen, when 30 million people end up watching this, it's clearly funny's funny, and it obviously went national. But for us, yeah, it's the little things. It's, mentions of the Yankees and the subway and like all that. It's just kind of relatable to people from New York, obviously. But what you mentioned that you're in Vegas. What are you up to these days? You're still on the road?
I'm not on the road enough. Anybody out there got a gig for me? Yeah, if anybody's watching, I got a gig coming up in Reno in December 7th for 3 days. Nothing really much. That's what happened when I started writing. I stopped going out on the road as much.
Right. Yeah.
So I can get to be a big headlining act. And now, so when I go to Vegas, I'm just I work at the Laugh Factory in Vegas and in Reno, which is great, but I don't work enough.
Yeah. It's something you got to do once, if you're doing writing, it's tough. There's one small part of the episode, the tape that we were talking about before you came on that we were curious about because we get a good kick out of it. And you mentioned a lot of the stuff on the show is real. So we thought we'd ask. When Jerry just yells out in Monk's, like he said either Bader or Beater or Peter. And then he goes, and that guy, he got off and yelled at the horse racing jockeys and the horse ran after him. Do you remember that story? Is that a real story by any chance?
I don't know if that's a real story or not. Yeah. That wasn't. No, I can't speak to whether that's a true story, but it's amazing how many of the stories that seem ridiculously made up are true. Larry went back to work after he was fired. Who does that?
Yeah, the SNL. Yeah.
Yeah, your episode, season 3, but again, it's the introduction of Ping. Ping, believe it or not, he lives in Seinfeld lore. And just
that was a real guy. I mean, there really was a delivery guy. Well, he wasn't,
and I love the George line. I mean, it epitomizes him for the whole run was, why do I do anything for women? Right. But I think that's just relatable. And I love Kramer and George getting all excited about the tape, like they're children, but that's probably, what you guys were probably doing in the club, 30 years ago, listening to that tape, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, with Seinfeld, it's great writing, and they found the perfect cast ensemble of people to do it. I mean, if you look at it, how much better Jerry got over 9 seasons doing it. He was very, and he wasn't good in the first few seasons. He wasn't relaxed yet, but he got better.
Exactly. Well, I guess we all do in life, right? But and you certainly got better. I mean, but it was great chatting with you tonight, Don. Like I said, the tape, one of our all-time favorites. So we appreciate all the laughs you've given us throughout the years, and best of luck down the road.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Don. This was great.
Good talking to you. Take care.
All right.
Cheers.